So good morning and welcome to the AASG Geothermal Data Project /USGen/SESAR webinar on sample registration. This morning, Kerstin Lehnert from Lamont-Doherty at Columbia will be speaking about the IGSN system and SESAR, which is a web application for registering samples. And let's just go from there. Kerstin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, and we apologize that we had a problem that we had started without the audience, but that's okay for us. I just hope that you didn't get too impatient in waiting for that. So sorry again. So here at Lamont and in a beautiful sunny day at New York, it's Kerstin. I'm the director of the Integrated Earth Data Facility, which is an NSF-funded data facility for providing a wide range of data services, data curation, archiving, preservation for solid earth data, especially from the marine environment, and for geochemistry and sample-based data. And with me is Leslie Xu, who is postdoc here in this program, and she will take over the second part of our presentation today in demonstrating the procedures of how to register samples at the moment, how to use the SESAR website. So thank you again all for attending and for giving me the opportunity to introduce you to the IGSN. So I'm starting off here with just showing us who you are actually listening to, which I'm really sorry that I can't do this as a face-to-face presentation, because I much rather do it with the audience right in front of me. So what I'm planning to do is give you an overview of the IGSN, a bit of the rationale for establishing the IGSN, and what it is actually, what it looks like, and how it should be used, how you can register the IGSNs, and so on. And would like to give you an update on the governance of the IGSN that has recently changed, and then introduce you to the system of Earth sample registration, SESAR. And that's when Leslie basically will take over and show you what the services of SESAR are. SESAR at the moment is the only registration agent for IGSNs, but again, that will change over the next year, and hopefully the state surveys and the US Geoscience Information Network will participate as an allocating agent in the system. So I'd like to start off with reminding everybody how relevant samples are for the earth sciences and for understanding the earth and its dynamic evolution and processes. There's a lot of funds, a lot of money is going into large sampling campaigns like the International Continental Drilling Program or the Ocean Drilling Program. A lot of resources are invested at the USGS or the state surveys to collect samples and to generate data that tells us more about our environment and the procedures. And we really need to make sure that we maximize the utility of these samples and of the data that are generated from these samples. Using data that were generated on samples and really ensuring that they are useful in the long term has some important requirements, and that is that the samples remain accessible to everybody, that the information about the samples, such as, where was the sample collected, when was it collected, how was it collected, that all that information is preserved and is accessible as well. And then it is really relevant that because samples are analyzed in different labs over time for different parameters and so on, that links can be established between the various data types that are generated and distributed through, over the literature or in different data systems. And this has been actually a problem so far. And the obstacles are that there aren't unique identifiers, and I will show you a few examples that will demonstrate that there aren't really good protocols for identifying samples, and that is particularly true for samples collected by individual investigators who basically just care about uniqueness within their own sample collection, while larger institutions or sampling campaigns have established their own naming protocols that ensure uniqueness for that particular area. But then again, when it comes to global sharing, there is a lot of overlap in naming protocols and sample names are duplicated. There's also a lack of a central or of a federation of sample catalogs that allows investigators or collectors or curators to find samples globally or even nationally or within programs. And unfortunately, there's still a huge lack of sample information in publications or in data systems that goes along with the data and ensures that that the data utility is really guaranteed. And so here are just a few examples. I've been taking a sample name such as D3-1 because I've been working a lot with samples from the marine environment, and many cruises go out and have dredges and number their dredges, and then the samples taken from those dredges. So D3-1 would be a sample from dredge number 3. The first sample picked out appears very frequently in publications, these number, but you know, when you put it into any search engine, you get huge amounts of results back, and most of them have nothing to do with sample D3-1, and there are many different samples actually that have that same name. And this just here on the left side of the panel, you can see compilations that come out of the PETIB database, which is a database for the geochemistry of seafloor, igneous and metamorphic rocks, where you can see in the lower part how an example for D3-1 coming from very different cruises. So the samples listed there are 5 completely different samples, but in the publications they all carried the same name. Or on the above it is an actual sample from a dredge 3, showing all the various names that this sample has had in the literature. So sample names have really not been persistent. They get changed by different investigators who work on the same sample. And ultimately, an integration or linking of the data is not possible unless you invest a lot of time into researching the history of that sample. And this creates a big problem for interoperability of data systems, for actually being able to find and link information in the digital world. As you see in the right part of the screen, this is a diagram from Kai Lin from the San Diego Supercomputing Center, created quite a number of years ago already, showing the dilemma of a programmer saying, I can't tell if the rock sample 10001 in this particular database is the same as sample 10001 in the different system. So we started to create the IGSN, or International Geo Sample Number, with 2 purposes. One is to provide identifiers that are guaranteed to be globally unique via a centralized control mechanism. And I've put down a citation from a paper by Friesen on recommendations for globally unique identifiers, really emphasizing that in our information environments now, it is really relevant to generate and assign unique identifiers to manage resources properly. The second purpose for the IGSN is to provide a mechanism that allows the cataloging and preservation of IGSN metadata through user-based registration of the objects. And that's a fairly well-known concept for actually making accessible and ensuring uniqueness of objects. So the IGSN, in its definition, is a unique identifier for physical objects collected from our natural environment, and with a particular emphasis on the earth sciences for now. It is actually structured in a way that it could be applied to other disciplines, to other objects, physical objects as well. We started the development in 2004 with a grant from the National Science Foundation, and the further development and operation of the system for earth sample registration so far has always been funded by the National Science Foundation. And our goal is to unambiguously locate, identify, and or provide a mechanism to unambiguously locate, identify, and cite physical samples. So here is an example of an IGSN in its current syntax, and I already want to briefly mention this might change over the next year. There could be other syntaxes allowed, but for now, the IGSN is a 9-character string, which is composed of a namespace. It's a unique user code that is a 3-digit string, and a 6-digit string, the so-called name-specific string, that is alphanumeric and allows within each namespace more than 2 billion different identifiers. We have designed the IGSN to be short enough with 9 digits to easily fit onto sample labels and into data tables in publications. The IGSN is supposed to be persistent. That is really relevant. It will not change. It will be managed in a way that it can be in the long term accessed. The metadata for it can be accessed in the long term. We are currently working on making this IGSN resolvable, meaning that when you enter an IGSN into appropriate search engines, it will lead you to the metadata profile for this IGSN. The IGSN is mostly unintelligent, sorry. It has no information encoded. So this 6-digit string is not meant to be structured in any way that, you know, there is information on its origin, on the location, on the type of the sample or whatever. I'm saying mostly unintelligent because we have that namespace. The user code often is chosen by the registrants in a way that it identifies them. So, for example, the user code SIO is for the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, or ECS is the Extended Continental Shelf Program of the US. So there is some information, at least, about the registrant in the number. A very important aspect is that these IGSNs do not replace any personal or institutional identification scheme, sample naming scheme. The IGSN is intended to be used along with the personal or institutional names, very similar to using a social security number together with your given name. What we see as the major benefits of the IGSN is that it really advances the sharing and reuse of samples. Through the registration of samples, it will become much easier to identify where samples have been collected, where these samples are accessible now. It will facilitate the tracking of the analytical history of the sample by maintaining the IGSN on sample labels. It will be possible to track moving samples through labs, keeping the IGSN in data tables or together with the data in publications or in databases will allow searches across the literature, searches across databases to find data and link the data. And the way the IGSN is structured, it also records the genealogy of samples and subsamples taken from them. And I will have a couple of slides about that later. It will clearly facilitate interoperability among sample-based data systems. And if Steve wants to, he can clearly comment on that later on, I think. And it really advances the linking between samples, data, and publications. Let me just show that to you. You probably are all familiar with DOIs of publications. So it's a unique identifier for every article in a scientific journal or for books. We have started in the community to also assign DOIs to data sets. And these data set DOIs can be cited in publications. So a publication DOI is linked to a data set DOI. Now, if the data set DOI itself is linked to the IGSNs of the samples that have data in this data set, it will in the future be possible to actually search across the literature by an IGSN and find all the data for a particular sample in distributed publications. And here it's showing again how the IGSN can link between all the various relevant parts of a sample life, from the repository to data systems to publications, and then also to the life of any subsamples that have their own publications and so on. To mention clearly here is that, as you can see, the IGSN of the child is completely different from the IGSN of the parent. Again, the analogy with the social security number, there is no information in the IGSN. Naming connections between samples and subsamples would have to be done through personal and institutional naming protocols. So moving on to the use of the IGSN, so I just want to talk a little bit about what objects should be registered, what objects should have IGSNs, what are the metadata that we currently collect, and how does the registration work. So which objects? Currently we have basically two levels of objects. There are the higher level objects, mostly parents of samples, and their subsamples are either locations such as drill holes or wells, soil pits, or terrestrial sections, stratigraphic sections, and so on, or parent objects like entire cores, dredges, CTD casts, and so on, and then the individual specimens that are taken from these parents. And these are generally categorized by material. They could be rocks coming from drill cores or from dredges, minerals taken from those rocks, actually fluids and so on. And they can be subdivided by their physical appearance into hand specimens, rock powders, thin sections, section halves, and all kinds of other physical objects. With respect to the metadata, on the right you can see an example metadata profile of an IGSN in SESAR. We distinguish between identification metadata, which is the sample name, the registrant's name, and actually it could be multiple sample names. We've had many cases where especially repositories have changed their naming protocols or numbering systems over time, and they want to preserve any of these numbers. So that's possible to put into the metadata record of an IGSN. There is descriptive metadata that gives information about the material. The material can then be classified, such as basalt or igneous rock, or mineral species, biological species, and so on. Age, size of the sample, any further description or comments that you want to keep within this metadata record. Then clearly, and most importantly, geospatial information about the site of the collection. Both geospatial coordinates and geographical names can go in here. Information about the collection includes names of expeditions or cruises, sampling campaigns, the name of the platform, meaning the name of a ship or so, the date of collection, the person who collected, the sampling technique. And then last but not least is the information about archiving. Where is the sample now, which repository, with some contact information so that people can access the sample if they're interested in it. Here, this is to emphasize what I mentioned earlier, the linking of samples and subsamples, just showing you how many layers or levels of hierarchy we can accommodate. I mean, it's endless. We could have endless children of children, grandchildren further on, and again emphasizing that the numbers generated for the children are different from, I mean, they're not consecutive or in any way related to the IGSNs of the parents. This is an example for such a sample genealogy for an ODP core showing its parent, which is a whole, siblings, which are other cores that come from this whole, and then the children being, 7 different sections. And when you would go click on the section IGSN here, you would see further down hierarchies of section half and the samples taken from those section halves. SESAR currently allows further metadata to be submitted to a profile of the IGSN that includes images, documents that could be, for example, scanned notes from your field book or data tables, descriptions. Then you can submit references that have more information or data for the sample, links to other online resources, databases that you know have data for that particular sample. And we are in the process of also establishing the capability for any user to define their own metadata fields to generate customized metadata profiles. This could, for example, include information about storage or information that is relevant to that particular application. For example, we've had museums register samples where they would like to keep information about the value of the sample, the quality of the sample, and so on. And those metadata would only show up in their own metadata profile. So if you want to get an IGSN, the first step to do is get an account with SESAR. You have to sign up with GeoPass, which is our authentication system. You will need to select a namespace for your samples and register that with SESAR. And then you can start assigning IGSNs. How that is done, that will we will demonstrate later. Leslie will do that. But you have two options. You can basically generate IGSNs within your own namespace, basically come up with a 6-digit string after your namespace and then register this IGSN together with the pertinent metadata for that particular sample. Or you can let SESAR generate the IGSN automatically when you're logged in. It knows which namespace you have and will then just generate numbers on the fly. One of the questions that we ask a lot is, when should I assign an IGSN? Now, the preferred way to do it, or the preferred time to do it, is clearly when new samples are collected, to do it right in the field, so that the sample the IGSN can be put on the label of the sample right away, especially if the sample is split up into among different investigators in the field already. Now, this is often difficult. It works if you basically create IGSNs before you go into the field and then put the metadata into some spreadsheet while you're out there. Otherwise, as soon as you come back into the lab and to the office, it would be preferable to register the samples. Archives have registered backwards, but it's often very difficult to then get these IGSNs that were created after the data was actually generated, to get these IGSNs be used by the people who have made the analysis. It's still very useful. But even when you get a sample into the lab, you should register it if it's not registered by then, or when you start putting it into a publication. When should the IGSN be used? Clearly, I said, the best thing is to have the IGSN on the sample label in your archive, in the repository, or where in your sample drawer in your office. Every sample should have that IGSN, and I mentioned that particularly because I've heard from many investigators the complaints about themselves that they open their drawers and find many samples with cryptic names where they have no idea anymore where that sample came from. So if it had an IGSN, all you would need to do, go online, search SESAR by that IGSN, and you would find all the metadata that you had submitted at some point in time. It's really relevant that samples who are shared among different labs carry the IGSN to make sure that later on all the data can be linked back to that particular IGSN and to that sample. And clearly, when you publish data about a sample, it should have the IGSN so that the linking and integration of samples is possible in the future. I've put down on an image here in this slide a sample info page from the PETDB database again, that now for the first time has IGSNs in the system, starting to link data via that IGSN. All right, just very brief, I'm starting to get late. In the current structure, the IGSN is governed entirely by SESAR. This is the historic development because we were the place where the IGSN got developed and promoted initially. So SESAR is the place where registrants, be it an investigator or a lab or repository, come to submit their metadata where they get their namespace. SESAR ensures that the metadata content is okay, that it's made accessible through a global sample catalog, and provides the tools for sample registration and so on. But this needs to change just to make the entire system of the IGSN more scalable and flexible to accommodate all kinds of requirements for be it for different disciplines, for different agencies, for different organizational structures. So about a year ago, we had a workshop at the San Diego Supercomputing Center. Steve was there. And we came up with a new architecture that now allows a federation of allocating agents to participate in a system that is governed internationally by an implementation board. And I don't want to go very deep into this. We have actually founded this implementation board, the IGSN EV, that defines the IGSN scope, defines the IGSN syntax, and maintains the handle system to make the IGSNs resolvable. And let me just run through this way faster. So we will have a clearing, metadata clearinghouse, a global catalog, still at SESAR, but then this federation of allocating agents who will provide the services to their specific user community, services for registration, for access to their samples, for the management of their sample metadata, and so on. With that new structure, the metadata will eventually change. The metadata they are at SESAR right now will stay the way they are, but other allocating agents might provide different metadata profiles, more extended ones, or more customized to other sample types. At the level of the SESAR clearinghouse, there will be a metadata set that is compliant with ISO and OGC standards that we will make accessible. So as I mentioned, the IGSN EV has been founded. There have been, or there are 9 initial members that are listed here, among them the Arizona State Geological Survey, as far as I understand, representing many of, or the efforts going on for the state surveys and the US Geoscience Information Network. I hope that Steve will comment on that later on. And we have another 3 pending memberships from the USGS, Geoscience Australia, and the CSIRO. They're still dealing with some legal procedures to become members. So in order to make actually, to give Leslie the hand over the presentation, I'm just gonna let her go from here, I think, right? I think that's okay. Do I need to hand you over? Or you can make it?
We're changing screens right now. Okay, we're just going to check to see that it's really showing. We're going to check this on the other computer in the room right now.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'm just going to run through a few things on the MySESAR interface to give you an idea of some of the basic functions that you can perform there. And the first thing I'm going to do is show an example of a user who has a lot of samples in their account. So this is the account of MGD, which is the Marine Geoscience Data System, which is a group that's right here next to us at Lamont-Doherty, and they have registered a lot of samples, marine samples mostly, into their account. So the home page of MySESAR you can see on the screen here, and there's several tabs at the top. This is the home page where there are quick links for registering samples, for looking at the samples you already have registered, and for some other account functions that you can perform. So if you want to look at some of the samples you have, here, for example, I will click on the list of cores that have been registered by MGD, and you have the option to view or edit the detailed sample profiles. So if I view this first one here, you can see the sample profile. And you can also see that this sample happens to have a parent associated with it and many siblings. So you can click on the parent to see the parent samples for this core. Okay, so as you can see, if you already have samples registered, you can view them and do things with them. But how do you register the sample in the first place? Okay, so now we have an account which has a few less samples, as you can see, and I will use it to demonstrate first how to register an individual sample. So one way is to use the link here, register an individual sample. So say I went into the field and I picked up a rock yesterday. The type is an individual sample. I'll call it LH2121. And we'll say this sample does not have any parent, so I'll click submit. I will let SESAR assign the IGSN itself. And I'll also default it to being a, I'll make this sample private, so only I can see it in my own, my SESAR account. So then I press submit. And here's a web form where you can enter in as much metadata as you have. So I'll just fill in a few fields. The rock. Okay, so I just filled in a few fields as an example, and you can see what these other metadata fields are. Okay, so now let's demonstrate. You don't need to fill in everything every time, even if you're doing an individual registration. You can use this link here, copy from my samples, and I'll take a previous sample that I've registered already.
Interesting.
Okay, so as you can see, it has two fields that were populated by the other sample, and those were filled in automatically. If I had filled in the latitude, longitude, and elevation, then all of those things could be copied over. So when you're finished, you click submit, and you can see the sample profile here. And now if I look at my list of samples, you can see that here in my list. Okay, so.
And you can see that it's actually duplicated here.
Yep. All right, so now I'll just demonstrate one batch registration. I'll do that by going to the sample registration tab. And I'll create a batch file template. And I'll choose the type. You can see that once you choose the type, these metadata fields come up in the display, and the ones that are checked off are the recommended ones that we recommend that they are filled in for each sample. But you can check off, we hope you check off even more fields. And then click to create. You can see it's downloaded the template to my machine. And we have a lot of information on the website to help you to fill out this template. Let me just open the template. Okay, so you can see that the new template here, and on the web page, we have at the help section, we have some information here that will help you to fill it out. So if you need a description of all of the fields and some examples of what they look like, you can find it on this page here. So this is the help page on the main SESAR page. I already prepared one of these templates and filled it out to show you the registration. So now I will go back to the sample registration tab and click upload a new batch file and click add. And here I'm uploading this one example. Okay, so here is the grid view where you can preview your samples. And you can see what it looks like, and you have options to update this grid, and ultimately when it looks like what you want it to look like, you click this button, register now, to go forward with the registration. But before I do that, I want to show you what happens if I upload a template where I made some mistakes. So I clicked on upload a new file. And this time I'll upload a spreadsheet where I knew I made some errors on purpose. Okay, so this time you see that when the grid view shows up, some cells are highlighted and you'll get these error messages above. And we tried to help you out by providing the links to some of the controlled vocabularies if you just happen to make a typo. Here it's GPSS instead of GPS. So you can either correct the samples directly in the grid, or you can upload a new file. You press register. Great, now I'm on the one with the errors. I'll just demonstrate how you would fix these things. Okay, and what you hope to see is this page here where your samples are accepted. And then in a few days, you'll receive an email from us. So I don't want to take up any more time since it's already 1:50 or so. And unless Kerstin has anything further to say, I think we will try to be interactive here. Please bear with us as we try to monitor who is raising their hand. And then we can unmute you so people can ask questions if you want. Okay, Stephen Richard. Stephen Richard raised his hand.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Steve.
We can see you with your hand up. Yeah, we hear you.
Wait. Yeah, so I just wanted,
only the panelists can hear you. I just clicked to send you a PIN number that you need to type in so that everyone can hear you.
Aha, a PIN number that I need to type in. Oh, you know what? I think we have a problem here because we have two different computers connected. Maybe that's so. Try that.
Should we do it over chat? Can everybody see the chat?
I put the PIN in.
Okay, I'll send you the PIN.
People can hear you.
Stephen Richard is now unmuted.
I'm unmuted. So anyway, well, I just, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can definitely hear you. Does
Okay.
everybody else hear you?
Can anyone else hear me? Hard to say. I hope.
Yes, you are being heard.
Okay. So, well, it's just from the point of view of, let's say, a state geological survey, then I still maybe I missed something in there, but what exactly would let's say, I mean, I know we already have we already went in and registered on SESAR, but what would another survey do if they wanted to start registering samples? What kind of back is there? They have to get their 3-letter prefix, don't they?
Yes, they do. They can, they have to make the decision if they register samples as the survey or as individual members of the survey.
Okay, so there's sort of a policy decision there.
There is a policy decision that has to be made by the institution who registers. If the institution wants to just have one namespace for all the samples they have, then they would need to establish one account, which means at the moment that you have to have one email address basically for that account that would then be shared. So it's the curator of that institution who would kind of be in charge of making sure that any numbers that are handed out are clearly unique. One of the complications in that scenario is if people go out into the field and collect samples and want to generate IGSNs themselves out in the field, they should only do that having made sure in advance that nobody else is using those same numbers.
So how would somebody, is there some way to reserve a block of numbers?
We are in the process. I mean, we are trying to develop that at the moment, that you can make that reservation, and then basically once you're back and you reserved 100 sample numbers beyond what you actually needed, then you can open those numbers up again.
Yeah.
But that's not implemented at the moment. That's something that has really come up as a necessity for people to be able to take numbers into the field, because we don't want to lose too many numbers if they take 2,000 numbers and then never use them up. But it needs a central sort of authority within the institution to make sure that that the numbers are properly reserved.
Right.
I mean, otherwise, and we've talked about that in the next, or in the new architecture, if you are the allocating agent for all of the state surveys and, IGSN or whatever, you could potentially come up with a new syntax that allows you to structure the IGSNs in a way that every individual within a certain institution can have their own namespace that is a subdomain of the state survey in general.
So that would be through SESAR. So there would be a subdomain under SESAR that would then have another convention for how the identifiers were assigned.
Well, SESAR would, in the new architecture, SESAR is not an allocating agent anymore. The allocating agent would be IDA.
Okay.
At the same level as IGSN or the Arizona State Survey, right? So we would handle the numbers for those people who are registering their samples through our website. If you set up your own allocation agent, then you would have, you would run basically the services for the state surveys and assign numbers and ensure their uniqueness for that particular user community.
Right, and I think that's probably something that they'll need. It seems like for the time being, it would make the most sense to me for the individual surveys to have their own namespaces. But that's sort of a AASG kind of policy decision, I think. But
I mean, we can actually talk about that more. One other possibility is for IDA to basically create a clone of the current system for the USGS and give it its own identity. And if you have specific requirements for metadata, specific vocabularies, then it would run as a parallel allocating agent, but on our systems.
Yeah.
And could be modified whichever way you need it.
Well, that's I know I've been talking about that a little bit with Sky Bristol, but we haven't really, either one of us had much time to pursue it in any depth. Maybe this will motivate us to get going on that. I don't want to stop the conversation. I'll open up to other people, but Kerstin, unfortunately, I have another call with the DOE project manager scheduled, and I couldn't very well change. So I'm going to have to run, but the rest of our crew is here, and hopefully Diane or Celia could help with any other questions that might come up from the States that have to do with the geothermal project.
Okay.
But thanks a lot for the presentation, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Sure. Take care.
I'll sign off now, but the others are still here.
So are there any other questions at the moment? Anybody raising their hands? Nobody?
Maybe see if is Kim still there?
Kim, are you still there? We've lost something.
Okay, well, just to mention that we...
Yeah, I think Kim is still on the line, but she's not in the same conference room as the rest of us.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we don't see anybody raising their hands. Do you have any indication from anybody? Please put out a chat. And we're clearly here to answer any further questions if needed. Please send emails to either me or Leslie personally or to info@geosamples.org. So with that, if there aren't any questions, then thank you very much for listening to us. And I hope this was useful for you. And again, please contact us if you have any questions. So take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kerstin.
Bye. Thanks.